If we haven't gotten the chance to meet, my name is Julia, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys this morning. And if you haven't gotten a chance to be part of this series we're in, it's called I Hate Being Broke. And not that long ago, I was a broke college student. You know, ramen noodles are my best friend. I don't miss those days, so I get that statement right. But last week, Pastor Andre gave a really great message. It was about Jacob and Esau and how Esau took the right now, the bowl of stew, and gave up the one day for what was to come, right, his birthright. And Pastor Andre went on to talk about how you have to be wise when it comes to handling money, right? You have to have a budget. You have to be debtophobic, which is not a real word, but don't tell him I said that, okay? And you have to have patience and grit. And so if you didn't get a chance to check out that message, make sure you do that. It's online. And this morning, we're going to continue with that talk of money. And I know that that can be kind of a scary subject for some of us. It's not really fun, right? Growing up, half of my family didn't really talk about money at all, and the other half of my family kind of fought over money a lot. So money is not my favorite subject to talk about either, but it's something that affects us every day of our lives, right? It's something we make a decision about every single day, and it's all throughout Scripture, and we can't escape it, so we have to talk about it. And so if you're here today and you're like, man, I picked the wrong day to come, it's going to be okay, I promise, all right? If you're here and you're like, man, I don't even have that much money, what does this conversation have to do with me? Or you're here and you're like, I know how to handle my money, I don't need someone else to tell me. Let's all just collectively, take a deep breath, right? Breathe in, breathe out. This morning, all I want to do is I want to tell us a story. And I think it's a story we all can find ourselves in, myself included. So can we do that? Can we have a little bit of story time? Yeah? Okay. So this story is about two sisters and a brother, okay? And they're really close. They're a pretty tight-knit family, right? And one day, the sisters realize that their brother is getting kind of sick. He's not that bad at first. It's not that awful, but then really quickly, he gets really, really sick. And, he's on his deathbed, okay? He's pale. He's laying there, and they're looking at him, and they're really distraught. They're like, what are we going to do? We have to find a way to heal him, right? And so they have this friend who's a healer, and he's known to heal all sorts of things. And so they send word out to him, and they're like, you have to come. You have to help our brother. He's dying. We need you. And so they send the word, and then, unfortunately, their brother dies. And so the whole town comes together. They're all there comforting the sisters, and they get word that the healer actually has arrived in town, even though it's a little bit too late. But one of the sisters, she's like, okay, well, I'm going to go talk to the healer. And so they have a conversation, and the healer says, well, actually, your brother may have died, but he's not going to stay dead. If you trust me, it's going to be okay, and he's going to rise again. And so the sisters are like, okay, I trust you. I know who you are. I trust you. And so she goes and gets her sister, and all the people in their house are like, okay, what's going on? So let's go figure it out. And they all go to this tomb, and it was a big cave, and the stone in front of it they had buried the brother in. And so he says, roll the stone away. Okay, they roll the stone away. And he calls out to the brother, and actually, he walks out of the grave. What he said was true, and the brother, they see him walk out of the grave. He still has the linens that they wrapped him in around his hands and his head, but he walks out, and he's alive. And so the sisters are like, oh my gosh, you're alive. I'm so excited. They're just amazed. All the people are amazed, except the rulers in the town are not excited at all, because this healer is gathering power, right? And he's getting a following. And they're like, okay, if you know who this healer is and where he's at, you better tell us. And the sisters ignore that, of course, because they're so overjoyed and they have so much gratitude, right? They're like, we're going to throw a big celebration in this guy's honor. We're going to have a big old dinner and invite everybody over. And so they do that. And one of the sisters, she's so excited and has so much gratitude that she bakes this big elaborate dinner, and she serves everyone that's there and all the people in the house. And this other sister, she's so filled with gratitude that she takes this expensive bottle of perfume that she has. She's been saving it. She takes this bottle, and she gets down on her knees in front of the healer, and she breaks the bottle of perfume, and she pours it out on his feet. And then it gets even kind of stranger, all right? So she's there on her feet, and she starts unbraiding her hair, and she takes her hair and she wipes up his feet and wipes up the excess perfume that was there. And that's how she showed her gratitude. Well, this guy who had been following the healer, he had been with him for a while, and he gets really outraged at this, right? He gets really annoyed. He's like, what are you doing? You can't just take that expensive perfume and waste it like that. We could have used that money and sold the perfume and helped the poor. And the room kind of falls silent, that awkward tension where it's like, oh, what's he going to say? And so he looks down at the woman at his feet, and then he looks at the man, and he says to him, no, she's doing what's right now. I'm about to die, and she's doing what's right, and she's showing her gratitude in this way. And this story is actually about Jesus. The healer is Jesus, and he was right. He knew he was about to die, and he's saying, this woman is preparing me for my burial, because that was the custom. And so Jesus would go on to be arrested and crucified and buried, and he would rise again. and he would be Jesus, right? And so this story is something that we find ourselves in. And I think if we look at the three characters in the story, that's what we're going to actually do this morning. And the first one that we're going to look at is Martha. So the woman who I said went out and met Jesus, right, and talked to him. That's the one sister, Martha. He went out and talked to Jesus, and this is how the conversation goes, actually. She says, Lord, this is John chapter 11, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So Jesus' response is, he's going to live, your brother will rise again, but she doesn't really get it at first. And so he's like, I know, she says, I know he will rise again at the resurrection of the last day. But Jesus is like, no, like, you don't get it. If I am the resurrection and the life, the one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And he asked her, do you believe this? And listen to Martha's response. She says, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And so that's keeping that in mind. We're going to go to the part of the story where, so Lazarus, he's risen, and they're having this big dinner. So we're going to go to that part of the story in John chapter 12. If you want to join me, it's going to be on the screen, and you can use the U Bible app if you have that. It'll let you read along with that too and take notes. But in John chapter 12, we pick up the story, and it says in verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had just raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. We're going to stop there for right now. So if you know it and Mary, you might have heard the story of how Martha was running around and serving while Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, right? And she sees her sister just sitting there, and she's like, Jesus, tell my sister to help me. Like, what's going on here? And he's like, no, she's doing the right thing. Like, she's connecting with me in this moment. And what I think is different here is we kind of have that mindset about Martha, but in this moment, remember, she's recognized that Jesus is the Son of God, right? She's just seen him raise her brother, and she knows that her brother is alive because of him, and that's her mindset right now. So she kind of has this bad rep, but I think she's showing us our first attribute of gratitude, and that is that gratitude puts your focus on Jesus. See, before her mindset was, so what do I have to do? What do I have to get done? How can I serve, right? But now she's focused on, Jesus, I'm so grateful for what you've done, so let me do this for you because I want to show you that I'm grateful, right? And I think that is pretty important, and it doesn't mean that if we have gratitude with our money that we can do whatever we want with our resources, right? But at the same time, just having gratitude with our resources and our service doesn't mean we have a free pass with our money. So I think they're both intertwined, and when you have that kind of gratitude for Jesus, it seeps into all areas of your life, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to get across, is that we can use all things in our life. So if you have musical talent, that means not just using it for your own gain, right? It means you can use it to worship, like our awesome worship band, right? They're pretty amazing. Or maybe it's for you, it's like writing encouragement for someone who needs it, or it's carpentry, or like serving someone in your community with something that you have, like all the stuff that's putting up your house, like giving it away to someone who needs it. Like, it can be so many different aspects of your life, but I think Martha shows us that, like, when you have gratitude for what Jesus has done, it does seep into all areas. So the next sister is Mary, and we're going to go ahead and continue in the story with verse 3 in chapter 12. It says, Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So here we see Mary also showing that her focus is on Jesus, because later on we're going to see that this perfume is actually worth a year's wages, right? That's a lot of money. What could you do with a year's worth of income? A lot of stuff, right? But she's using it, she's focusing on Jesus and giving it to Jesus. But I think even more than that, she shows us our second attribute of gratitude, which is that gratitude makes you vulnerable. So if you're going to go anoint someone, usually you anoint somebody over their head, right? If you didn't know that, that's how it's done. You anoint them over your head. And what she's doing here, she's choosing to pick a servant's position. Only a servant would get down on someone's feet because that's how they wash them. So she's making herself vulnerable in that way. But not only that, she's unbraiding her hair, and she has her hair down around her face. That is not something a woman would ever do in that culture. That just puts you in such an awkward position. Like, everyone in the house could be judging her for that. But in this moment, I don't think she cares what people think. I don't think that she's concerned with how weird or awkward or like outlandish she looks, because she's so focused on what Jesus has done. Like, I wonder if she's thinking about, as she's doing this, just days before, she had anointed her brother in the same way before he was buried, right? When in this culture, when someone dies, you take these perfumes and these herbs and you anoint the body and then you bury them. When she's doing this, she's so grateful, like she had just done this for her brother, but now he was alive and sitting right next to Jesus as he's anointing her feet, right? So I think that was her focus. And I think if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you start tithing, you can kind of feel that vulnerability, right? You're like, oh no, what if something goes wrong? Like, what am I going to do? Or maybe you, for me, it was when I went into ministry, I got some feedback that was kind of like upsetting at first. I wanted to study ministry, but people were like, how are you going to make money doing that? Like, that's not a smart plan, Julia. Like, come on, you can think of something better. But I knew that's what God was calling me to do. And I knew, like, yeah, that was kind of a fear in the back of my mind. Like, I got to be able to afford to live, God. Like, how are you going to provide? And it put me in this position where I knew that I would have to rely on God. And every step of that, I knew that I would have to continually trust God with that. And I think that's what gratitude does. Like, you're so aware of what God has already done for you that you're willing to take that step to trust in him with the next step, right? So, like, you've already seen him provide for you for this step. So you're like, okay, God, this makes me kind of uncomfortable. It puts me in a vulnerable position, but I'm willing to take this step because you've already got me this far, right? So I think that's what vulnerability does for you. The next attribute that we see here that Mary shows us is that gratitude grows you and it grows those around you. So, okay. Who can identify what brand this is without me even having to tell you? It's a store you get lost in smelling stuff. Yeah, you know? Bath and Body Works. Yeah, thank you. Okay. I might get some hate for this, but this is Whipple, all right? I don't care what season it is. I'll use it all year round. So those of you that have like certain seasons, I'm sorry. But if you've ever actually read this, it's called a fine fragrance mist. So if you know what that means, it means you got to spray it like a whole bunch, right? You got to spray like a whole cloud of it for it to be effective. But say if you buy a little bit more of expensive kind, you just spray a little bit on your wrist, right? And you rub them together. Ladies, you know what I'm talking about, right? And you just spray once on your neck, right? That's all you have to do. And if you get the really expensive kind, you just have to like dab like a really tiny bit, right? Well, this perfume that Mary's using is the really, really expensive kind, okay? Like, it's worth a year's wages. It's super potent. And she doesn't just like dab some on Jesus' feet. She pours all of it on his feet. And she's like mopping it up with her hair, right? So you know that stuff smells really strong. And I kind of looked into it because I didn't know what nard was. If you knew, that's really cool. But it smells like lavender, apparently. So the entire house smells like lavender. And I think about that, and I'm like, I wonder if that smell is clinging to Jesus. Like, he leaves there. He's still going to smell like lavender. It's not just going to wash away after, like, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours? I don't know how long it lasts. But what if he's walking down the street and someone's like, Jesus, why do you smell like that? Like, what's going on? Why do you smell like lavender? But he's able to tell them, like, it's because Mary was so humble and she worshiped me in this way. And that's what happens with gratitude. I think it has this ripple effect. So when you show generosity, it has that ripple effect. And we've seen that in this community. When we get to, I don't know if you guys know this, but as a church, we got to provide like candies and just encouragements and stuff for the teachers here at the school and the middle school. And like, we've had teachers come and be part of the church because of those invites, and they got to hear about Jesus, and so that's the ripple effect of when you show that kind of gratitude, it ripples out, right? I have another cool example because God is cool, and this is a pretty cool one I like to talk about. When I was in college, I got this opportunity to go to Cambodia. It's like halfway across the world. It's a really cool country. But I was sitting with this professor, and he asked me like 2 weeks before the deadline of the money was due. Like, that's not a cheap airplane ticket or like a cheap ticket. And I was like, I mean, yeah, God, if you're calling me to that, that'd be really cool, and I'll go. But I'm a broke college kid again, remember? Like, I don't have the funds to do that. But if you make a way, sure, I'll follow. And I was praying about it, and I said that. I was like, God, if you do it, I'll follow. And I went to this prayer cabin that was right off campus, and I went there pretty regularly. And I walk in, and I see on the table next to the chair that there's this note and like a money sitting there, and it says, if you've asked God, and this is what the note actually says, I keep it in my Bible. It says, if you've asked God to meet a financial need, then take this and thank the Father for his provision. And I was like, whoa, because I had never seen anything like that just sitting there before that day, after that day, like never saw anything like that again. And I was thinking about that, whoever left that, like, they have no idea how that was going to grow my faith. Like, they had no idea. They're like, sure, God, I'm grateful for what you've done. So if you say leave money here for whoever comes next, sure, they're probably just going to take it. It's not going to be a big deal. But like, whoever did that, they changed my faith. Like, they grew my faith in such a cool way, and that led to me being able to stand here and saying, like, God provided. Like, that was him showing me, like, I got you, I will provide for that trip. And he provided, like, crazy, miraculous, like, all of it. And I was like, it just made me think that when you take one step of gratitude, like, you have no idea the kind of effects that you could have on the other people around you. So it doesn't only grow you because you're in that vulnerable spot where you have to trust God. It also grows everybody else because they see the faith that you have, and it answers probably prayers that they have been praying too. So that's really cool. And I think Mary and Martha show us really a good example of what gratitude is. And in this story, there's a flip side of that, right? Isn't there? The story of the man who's outraged. So in comparison to their gratitude, we see Judas's pride. And so if we continue reading in chapter 12, pick up in verse 4 is where we left off, we'll hear about Judas and how he reacted to the situation. But it says, one of Jesus' disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. And leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. And see, Judas here is showing us our first attribute of pride, and that is that pride puts focus on yourself. I mean, that's literally what the word means, right? Is pride is when you focus on yourself. But see, Judas didn't really care about the poor here, right? We see that. It says, like, he's saying, yeah, I care about the poor, but he doesn't. He just wants that money because he knows it's going into the money bag, and he's going to get to take it later, right? So I imagine him in this moment, like, as Mary is about to pour out this perfume, do you think his hand, like, instinctively reaches out, and he's like, oh, I wish I could save that. Like, I wish I could have that. And he gets angry in that moment, right? He's like, I know what I could do with that money. Like, I know how I could use that for myself. Why would you waste in that way? Because he couldn't understand how that was worship. And that's what happens when you have that heart of pride, that other people's generosity and their giving makes you, like, uncomfortable. It rubs you the wrong way. It makes you a little bit angry. And the other week I was having a conversation with a student at our youth group. Commercial break here. If you are in 6th through 12th grade and you don't go to youth group, you really should. It's awesome. We get to hang out and talk about Jesus and play games, and it's really important. So if you're not there, or you know someone who's in 6th through 12th grade, make sure they get there. But I was having this conversation with a senior in high school, and she was talking to me about how she wanted this year, 2020, to look different, right? We're talking about resolutions and how we wanted to grow throughout the year. And she told me about how she wanted to just, like, embrace what was happening right then, right now, and, like, embrace the moments and stuff. And so she was talking about how she was driving down the road one day, and she saw this really nice punch buggy. You know, like the ones that you used to use as an excuse to hit your siblings or something. You yell punch buggy and punch them. Well, she saw a really nice one of those, and she was like, I really want to drive that. Like, that looks really nice. And then she caught herself, and she's like, wait, why am I thinking that? Like, my car is such a blessing. Like, I'm a senior in high school, and I have this nice car, and I'm able to drive around. Why am I letting myself be distracted by this? And it sounds like such a small thing, but when we continually focus on the things that we don't have and the things that other people have that we want, we get distracted and we don't see, like, what's happening right now. She's right. She's so wise for a senior in high school. But, like, when you focus on that kind of things, you can't see how God is moving in your right now, in your present day. And that's important because you can't be having split focus, right, like that. So that's the first attribute of pride. The second attribute of pride is that pride puts self-image first. So we see here that Judas is trying to disguise his pride, right? He covers it up pretty well. He's like, oh, well, we could use that to help the poor, because he knows what's coming. Like, he's going to be able to use it later if that's what happens, but he's trying to make himself look good and make it look right. But Jesus isn't really fooled. He's like, yeah, Judas, if that's what you want to do, that'd be really good. Like, when I'm gone, you do that. Like, yes. But he's not actually fooling anyone. And that's what happens in our life, too, when we have pride about how we handle our money, is we start to try and have this really nice house, right? And we get all this nice car and we get this nice stuff, but with this nice house, we have an empty house inside because we can't afford to live that way, right? Or we try and go through the motions and act like we're doing things the right way just to make people think we have a great self-image, even though we know our heart's not connected with it. In high school, I went to a public school. It wasn't a private school. We still had this dress code we had to follow. And it was awful, but we had to wear blue, gray, or white polos, right, with a little collar, and we had to wear khakis or jeans. And no one liked this dress code, but the point of it was to reduce bullying, right, because if everyone's dressed the same, then it should be theoretically no bullying. Well, that didn't really happen because people still picked up on superficial differences. But the other point of it was that it helps us focus on learning, right? Because if you're not putting on the same thing every day and you're not focused on what you're wearing, then you have more time to focus on school. Well, that was the theory, right? But us, myself included, my peers in high school were ridiculous, and we're like, no, we're going to make these look cool, right? You have to have the right brand of polo, because you can't make a polo look good. Like, at least I couldn't in high school, so it doesn't really matter. But you had to have American Eagle or Hollister or all these kind of brands, and we got so caught up in that and trying to look popular, even though we had this thing that was trying to help us to not be distracted by that. But we fell into it anyway. We had to look cool, and we distracted ourselves from learning. And the same thing happens in life is when we try to look the part or to look cool, we get distracted of actually living life and enjoying the moments and having gratitude. And that's what gratitude does for us. It's a protection against that kind of comparison, that kind of trying to build up our own self-image. Because when we focus on what Jesus has done for us, on the gratitude of what he's done for us and what he's brought us from, that becomes our identity, right? We don't have to focus on trying to build our own identity and image. So then the third attribute of pride is that pride restricts your growth. And we see that very clearly in Judas. Even here it says that Judas was going to betray Jesus. And he couldn't connect with this moment here either. It was this relationship with Jesus. He couldn't understand that what Mary was doing was worship because he's so focused on what he wanted to do with his money. And it continues down in his life. Later on, he's going to betray Judas for 30 pieces of silver, right? He's going to let Jesus be arrested and then eventually crucified, even though Jesus wasn't just his acquaintance, right? He knew Jesus. He'd been with Jesus for years, and they were tight, and they were close, and they'd gone through a lot together. But still, he chose money over Jesus. And, I mean, that's what pride does, too. It makes you choose money and choose what you can get for yourself over what you can get when you follow Jesus. Because money can either be a resource or it can be a restriction to your growth. But you can't choose both. You can't love both Jesus and money. And we see that in Judas. Life is made of a lot of choices. We get to choose how we view and how we use money. And if you've chosen to follow Jesus, if you've chosen to give your life to him, then you're Lazarus, right? He's raised you from death to life. And you've been raised from your sins into grace and freedom. But you also get to choose if you want to be like Mary, who uses her money to worship Jesus in humility and is humble before him. And you get to choose if you want to be like Martha, who uses her resources and her time and her service to worship Jesus in that way. Or you get to choose to be like Judas, who wants what he wants for himself, and he lets his pride get the better of him, and it becomes his downfall, right? But all this that we've been talking about is not like a one or the other in every single like section of your life, right? They're kind of like a spectrum. And so in each attribute, you could be somewhere in the middle, you can be towards one or the other. But in the first one, whether you focus on yourself or you focus on Jesus, it's kind of like if you're using this Bath & Body Works perfume, right? So you're giving God a tithe maybe, and you're kind of like concerned with how he thinks about your money. But really, most of your time and most of your focus and most of your money goes towards for like your own goals and your own ambitions and your success and what you want out of life. And you're giving God probably the bare minimum, right? And he's not your top priority, but he's somewhere in there. Like, you're doing okay. He's somewhere up in the line. But today, if you examine your heart and you find that maybe you are leaning towards more focusing on yourself, you can take steps. You're not stuck in any of these places, right? You can take steps towards gratitude if you want that. And maybe for you, that looks like you're tithing 6%, and you get to maybe move towards 7%. Or maybe you see someone in your community that needs a helping hand in some way, and you get to be that hand and to offer them help. Or maybe you start sponsoring a child in another country. Whatever it looks like for you, if you start to flip your perception of how to use money towards gratitude, and you start realizing that it's God's money, and we get to have gratitude when we use it, then that will help you move away from focusing on yourself. Right, and the second comparison we have here, the spectrum that we have, is that gratitude will make you vulnerable, while self-image was put first when you have pride, right? And so that's kind of like using this fancy perfume, right? So you are giving God the tithe, right, and an offering, and you're doing really good probably. You're giving a lot of money, and that's all great, but it's more of an obligation maybe. If you examine your heart and you find that when it comes to money and God, you're doing what you have to do because you have to do it, and it's not really a heart thing. You're not really at the feet of Jesus worshiping like Mary was. you're probably more towards the side of self-image and putting that first with pride. And if you tend to care a lot about like what people are thinking about based on what you own or what they're thinking about when you tithe and how much you tithe and all of that, if that's kind of your focus and you want to move away from that towards gratitude, there's a couple steps that you can take, right? The first step is admitting that's where you're at, and that's hard, but we've all been there, right? We've all had pride when it comes to our money and how we want to build our image. Like we all want to look cool and fit in like our cool little polos in high school, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, but the first step of moving away from that is admitting that's where you're at. And that takes courage and that takes vulnerability. And once you take that vulnerability and you take that step, the next step is to reorient how you perceive money. Because money, again, can either be something that you use to gain for yourself, you use to move yourself forward, or you use it to worship God and to move the kingdom forward. And so once you make that step, when you get that perception right, the third step is the continual step of every time God calls you to a new step of vulnerability, you say yes, right? Even though it makes you uncomfortable, you say yes. Okay, God, you want me to do that with my money? It's really uncomfortable, but okay, yes. Like you keep making that yes step, and eventually you'll find that you're not even anywhere near the pride end of the spectrum anymore, right? You're towards gratitude. And then the third spectrum that we kind of see is that gratitude either grows you or pride restricts your growth. And that would look like not using any of the perfume, right? So maybe when you think about money, God's not in your thoughts at all. And you just think about how the world works and how the world tells you to spend money, and it tells you to be successful and buy a big house and to get the right stuff and look the right way. And if that's where you're at, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you continuously choose to follow that idea of money over choosing Jesus, you're going to end up like Judas, right? Because you can't love both. But if you continuously choose gratitude and choose to remember what God has done for you and how he's provided for you in the past, and that takes hold of how you use your money now, then you'll start to understand what Paul meant when in Philippians 4, and he says this. He says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. See, Paul's focus in that moment, the reason he's able to be content with whatever the circumstance is that he's focused on Christ, right? He's focused on the union of Christ and what Christ has done for him and how he's provided and been good to him and brought him life, right? And that's his focus, not on his money and what that can provide for him. He's not focused on how to use his money to grow himself and to make himself look better, to get ahead in life, but on how to use his money to grow the kingdom. And when you do that, when you start to live counterculturally, right, people are going to be like, what is this person doing this with their money? Like how they're thinking about God when they're making choices with their money. People are going to start to take notice with that. So not only will it grow you when you're in that vulnerable state and starting to live more like Jesus, it grows the people around you that see that. So that's kind of my challenge for you today, I guess, is that you get to choose in all those areas. You get to choose how you view your money and how you use it. And you get to choose whether you want to have gratitude with what you've been given and how God has provided for you. Or you get to choose to have that pride that says, I earned this money. It's my money. I can do with what I want with it. And that will lead you down the same path as Judas. So that's kind of all I have this morning. We're going to pray together, and then Pastor Andre is going to come up and give you some instructions. So will you pray with me this morning?